The Second World War ended in 1945, leaving behind a scarred planet. Cities lay in ruins, nations were exhausted, and millions of lives had been lost in the most destructive conflict humanity had ever witnessed. Yet, within the ashes of victory, a new struggle was already beginning to take shape. It was not a war fought with massive armies, storming beaches, or tanks rolling across continents. Instead, it was a war of ideology, politics, espionage, and the ever-looming threat of nuclear annihilation. This is the story of the Cold War, a global confrontation that shaped the second half of the 20th century. A struggle between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. A contest of nuclear standoff and global influence that would last nearly half a century, touching every corner of the world. The Cold War was not a single battle. It was not declared formally, nor was it ever officially concluded with a peace treaty. It was a conflict defined by suspicion, by fear, and by the pursuit of dominance on a global scale. Its front lines were invisible, stretched across borders, cultures, and ideologies. Its weapons ranged from hydrogen bombs to propaganda films, from spy networks in Berlin to astronauts in orbit. To understand the Cold War, we must first return to its origins, to the uneasy alliance of World War II, where seeds of mistrust were already being sown between East and West. When the Allied powers defeated Nazi Germany, they did so as partners of necessity, not of trust. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union had fought together against Hitler, but they envisioned the post-war world in vastly different ways. The United States, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, dreamed of a world guided by liberal democracy and free trade. Roosevelt hoped that an international organization, the United Nations, could preserve peace and prevent future conflicts. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, envisioned something entirely different. Having suffered immense destruction and the loss of more than 20 million Soviet citizens during the war, Stalin's priority was security. He sought to create a buffer zone of friendly governments in Eastern Europe to protect against any future invasions. Thus, as soon as the Nazi threat disappeared, tensions between the Allies rose to the surface. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, the Big Three Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Stalin met to discuss the future of Europe. Agreements were reached on the division of Germany, on the creation of the United Nations, and on promises of free elections in Eastern Europe. Yet, even as pens signed the documents, mistrust lingered. Stalin had little intention of allowing true democracy in the territories his Red Army now occupied. By the time the leaders gathered again at Potsdam in July 1945, the tone had shifted. Roosevelt was gone, replaced by Harry Truman. Churchill had been voted out, replaced midway through the conference by Clement Attlee. And Stalin now faced partners more skeptical of his intentions. At Potsdam, Truman mentioned to Stalin the existence of a new and powerful weapon, the atomic bomb, but without detail. Stalin, however, already knew of it through Soviet espionage. Only weeks later, the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world had entered the nuclear age, and the dynamics of power were forever changed. In the aftermath of war, Europe was divided. To the west, nations rebuilt with American assistance. To the east, communist governments emerged under Soviet influence. In March 1946, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill traveled to Fulton, Missouri, where he declared that an iron curtain had descended across the continent. Behind that curtain lay Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and East Germany, all under Moscow's control. The United States responded with a policy of containment, articulated by diplomat George F. Kennan. The idea was clear. The Soviet Union could not be allowed to expand its influence further. The world, Kennan argued, must resist Soviet pressure wherever it appeared. President Truman embraced this vision. In 1947, he announced what became known as the Truman Doctrine, pledging support for nations threatened by communism. That same year, the Marshall Plan was unveiled, offering billions of dollars in economic aid to rebuild Western Europe. To the United States, this was humanitarian assistance and a bulwark against communist influence. To the Soviets, it was an attempt to lure countries away from socialism and into America's orbit. The Cold War had begun in earnest. Germany, divided into zones of occupation, soon became the first major battlefield of the Cold War. Berlin, the capital, was itself divided, yet it sat deep within the Soviet zone. In 1948, the Western Allies introduced a new currency in their zones of Germany, signaling steps toward economic recovery. Stalin saw this as a threat. In June, he ordered a blockade of West Berlin, cutting off all road, rail, and canal access to the city. In response, the Western Allies launched the Berlin Airlift, an unprecedented operation that supplied the city by air for nearly a year. Cargo planes landed every few minutes, delivering food, coal, and medicine to 2 million residents. The operation demonstrated Western resolve and undermined Soviet attempts to force concessions. By May 1949, the blockade was lifted. Germany's division became permanent. That same year, the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, was created. Soon after, the Soviets established the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. The line across Europe had hardened. The Berlin crisis highlighted the need for security cooperation among Western nations. In April 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed. Its founding members pledged mutual defense. An attack on one would be considered an attack on all. The Soviets saw this as an aggressive alliance. 6 years later, in 1955, they responded with their own pact, the Warsaw Treaty Organization, commonly known as the Warsaw Pact. Europe was now divided militarily as well as ideologically. The balance of power rested not only on armies and alliances, but increasingly on nuclear weapons. In August 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb, shocking the world and ending America's brief nuclear monopoly. Both superpowers now possessed the capacity for unimaginable destruction. The arms race escalated quickly. The United States developed the hydrogen bomb in 1952, a weapon far more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan. The Soviets tested their own hydrogen bomb in 1953. Military planners developed strategies of deterrence. The idea of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, took hold. If either side launched a nuclear strike, the other would retaliate, ensuring total annihilation. It was a paradoxical logic. peace through the certainty of destruction. At the same time, both nations built delivery systems, bombers, missiles, and submarines to ensure their nuclear arsenals could survive a first strike and deliver a devastating counterattack. The world lived under the shadow of the mushroom cloud,